Hey friends, welcome back to Health Coach Radio. It's Erin here, and today we're wading into one of the most divisive topics in modern nutrition. I'm a little scared, I'm not gonna lie. This is one that gets people seriously fired up. Seed oils. Depending on which corner of the internet you hang out in, seed oils are either the dietary root of all modern illness, or they're a completely misunderstood scapegoat, unfairly blamed for everything from infertility to inflammation and beyond. So what's actually true? Well, that's what we're going to unpack today. Not to take sides, but to show you what the totality of the evidence says, how ancestral and evolutionary health thinkers like Mark Sisson arrived at their perspective, and how newer research has both challenged and supported parts of that narrative. Because as health coaches, our job is not to have a bias. It's to understand why we might have a bias, to confront our bias, and to stay curious enough to keep evolving. Because that's what really helps our clients, the health consumer, to feel unconfused. So let's dig in. Let's start with the basics. What even is a seed oil? Well, seed oils are exactly what they sound like. They're oils extracted from the seeds of plants. So think soybean, canola, sunflower, safflower, grapeseed. They fall under the general broader umbrella of vegetable oils sometimes, which also includes oils pressed from fruits or other plant parts like olive oil or avocado oil, coconut oil. These are all vegetable oils, but technically olive oil is a vegetable oil, but it's not a seed oil. Okay, the distinction matters mostly because of how these oils are extracted and refined. That's the big issue with seed oils. So while olive oil and avocado oil are usually pressed mechanically, a process that's relatively gentle, because you can envision in your mind's eye an olive and avocado, they're fatty. They have a fat in them that you can tell. So that fat is squeezed out. And that's a relatively gentle, simple-ish process. Most seed oils have to be extracted using more dramatic processes, including chemical solvents like hexane that pulls the oil out of this tiny seed. And then after that, they're refined, bleached, and deodorized to make them shelf stable and neutral tasting. So that sounds scary, okay? Bleached and deodorized, those don't feel like words we want describing food products. But the context is key. We're not talking about Clorox bleach, okay? This doesn't mean the final product is toxic sludge. Those processes are simply industrial methods designed to make oil usable at scale. And according to current safety data, residual solvent levels in the final oil are pretty minuscule, well below anything harmful. But still, this industrial origin story is one of the reasons seed oils became such a hot topic in ancestral health circles and holistic wellness circles. So let's talk about this from that perspective, the ancestral or holistic perspective. One championed by folks like Mark Sisson, who I consider to be a wellness guru and who's been pretty outspoken about avoiding industrial seed oils since the beginning of his platform. And Mark's main concerns can be grouped into three big ideas. Number one, industrialization. Seed oils are not something humans evolved eating. They are the product of 20th century technology. They're literally invented for machine lubrication before becoming food. So in that sense, they're industrial rather than natural. And just by virtue of the fact that they must be industrially processed or processed, depending on how you prefer to pronounce that word, they are not as natural as a naturally occurring plant oil, like an olive oil or an avocado oil. Number two, omega-6 overload. These oils are higher in omega-6 fatty acids, primarily linoleic acid. And omega-6s are not bad. They are an essential fatty acid, but modern diets have skewed the ratio dramatically toward omega-6, away from omega-3. And Mark and others in the ancestral health community argue that this imbalance may drive systemic inflammation and oxidative stress and all the downstream metabolic issues. And then the third is a cellular health piece. The polyunsaturated fats, which are chemically less stable and can oxidize easily, especially when heated. Well, if these oxidized fats get incorporated into our cell membranes, it could, in theory, impair cellular function, cellular flexibility, cellular communication, and such. So we have to think about where fats are used in the body. And our entire cell membranes, every one of them has this cell membrane made out of fatty acids. And so we want those to be the fatty acids the body's expecting. And when we introduce these sort of industrial fats, they may get assimilated into cell membranes. And then we just don't really know necessarily how that affects the cells, if at all. We just don't necessarily know. So in Mark's worldview, because we did ask him, seed oils represent kind of a mismatch, like an evolutionary mismatch between how the human body evolved and what's being fed in the modern food system. And that, I think, is true. I don't think we can argue that. I mean, anybody on any side of this argument would agree that we should probably consume less processed food, right? To whatever extent we can. Now, I'm pretty sensitive to some of these social determinants of health. I've had clients who could only afford processed food, in which case we're going to do the best we can. But if we just zoom out and just absolutely look at the facts, these industrial oils are a new creation in our food environment, and it stands to reason that our DNA doesn't necessarily know what exactly to do with it. So Mark's purview has often been, for a long time, if you really want to clean up your diet, start by eliminating the 3 modern offenders, which would be the industrial seed oils, the refined grains, and the processed sugars. So instead, Mark might recommend fats that are minimally processed and evolutionary familiar, like butter, ghee, lard, coconut oil, olive oil, avocado oil, etc. Now, I actually think most people would agree that those are healthier. I mean, anybody who promotes the Mediterranean diet is probably pro avocados and olives, right? I think we know the Mediterranean diet. You don't have to be a kooky paleo primal ancestral person, if you think that's kooky, to believe in this. Even folks in the very straight edge part of the nutrition world would agree that naturally unprocessed, unrefined foods are probably better. We should probably eat more of that to whatever extent we can. So from a pattern recognition standpoint, it's not bad advice to have a little less processed food in your life and to start cooking with real fats that actually exist in nature and your body knows what to do with them. But the benefits of seed oil reduction, this is where nuance really matters. The benefit may come more from eliminating ultra-processed foods overall than from avoiding the molecules of linoleic acid. So let's look at what the modern nutrition science tells us. We can accept that there's probably an evolutionary mismatch. This is a relatively new food product in our environment. However, for all the passionate anti-seed oil content online, there is actually very little human evidence showing that seed oils themselves cause inflammation or disease. And in fact, there are many studies that suggest the opposite. So now this gets us into a little quagmire where now we're arguing with each other on the internet. And I maybe if I remember to, I'll come back to this in a second, because I don't think arguing with each other on the internet is the path forward for health and wellness, if I may be so bold. But a 2025 study found that higher blood levels of linoleic acid, which is the same omega-6 fatty acid found in soybean and sunflower oil, were actually associated with a lower marker of inflammation and lower risk of diabetes. And then a meta-analysis, including work published in the Circulation Journal and the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, have consistently shown that replacing saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats like those in seed oils can lower LDL cholesterol and reduce cardiovascular risk. I think we all know the shortcomings of nutrition research generally. So these studies and meta-analyses are compelling because they are in human trials, and those have shortcomings. I just think anytime we're talking about the science of nutrition, we need to remember the science of nutrition isn't really great just because it has limitations. And so most often the outcomes of these types of studies and meta-analyses would be correlative, but probably not causative. So let's just keep that line in the sand. So where did this omega-6 causes inflammation idea even come from? Well, it's largely theoretical based on biochemical pathways. So it's sort of a hypothesis based on what science-minded folks know and understand about how different fatty acids behave in the body. Omega-6 fats can be converted into arachidonic acid, which is a precursor to pro-inflammatory molecules. That is true. But the body doesn't automatically convert all omega-6s into inflammatory compounds. And when you look at population data, people with higher omega-6 intake don't have more inflammation. The problem isn't that omega-6 is bad. It may be that omega-3 is low, so it is an imbalance problem. But it's not an omega-6 problem specifically. So instead of saying omega-6s are inflammatory, it's more accurate to say omega-6 is fine as long as you're also getting enough omega-3, which means the real fix isn't maybe to fear seed oils, but to increase omega-3 fatty acids from fish, eggs, or even supplements. Now, am I defending seed oils? Does that mean seed oils are perfect and fine? Not necessarily. We're having a nuanced conversation here. One of my favorite things about being a modern health and wellness professional is that we have access to more information than ever. And it's also one of my least favorites because we can really start to really self-identify with one point of view. And this is what I often encourage health coaches, as hard as it is, we do have to confront our biases and try our best to become unbiased, lobotomized, open books, willing to explore both sides. And for whatever it's worth, this is something that I do quite often. When I have a strongly held conviction, I actually seek out the opposing viewpoint and try to learn what the opposition, in a manner of speaking, thinks. Case in point, not relevant to this conversation, I have been devouring flat earth content. Now, whatever you think about flat earth or round earth, globe earth, I believe in a globe earth, but I don't know why flat earthers believe in flat earth. And I probably should, before I judge, I should probably figure out why they think that. So it's a practice like anything. So there are some legitimate concerns with seed oils that are worth keeping an eye on. Number one, oxidation during heating. Some seed oils can degrade at very high temps, forming oxidation products. Though in real world cooking, the levels tend to be pretty small and maybe not clinically relevant. Like if you're using a little bit of canola oil to saute something, it's a tablespoon. The dose does make the poison sometimes, right? In a lot of times. Number two, in the ultra processed food context. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier. Seed oils show up everywhere: fries, chips, prepackaged snacks, because these oils have been industrialized and processed to be shelf stable. They're such a great ingredient to add to packaged and processed foods, which also need to be shelf stable. So anything you're going to buy in a package or a can or a box, kind of down the middle aisles of the grocery store, probably has some kind of canola, soybean, safflower, sunflower oil in it. So it's inside processed food. And these processed foods also contain a lot of other bad stuff, like excessive processed carbohydrate and salt, sodium, and additives. And those combos are truly what's harmful. And we can talk about sort of the hyperpalatability of those foods, right? So we're talking about the stuff in the chip and the cookie aisle that can just be overconsumed, and it's hypercaloric and potentially causing, they're obesogenic, potentially causing metabolic dysfunction, from a public health perspective. Like, that's a bigger picture. That's the ultra processed food context. And I think that's probably worth, I think most modern health and wellness professionals would agree. Maybe we tap the brakes on ultra processed food if we can. If we can. What if you're working with a population who only has access to processed food or only has the budget to process food? I think we have to make concessions there too. If my client can only afford chicken nuggets and, frozen French fries, I'm going to have to make that work. I mean, we're dealing with people and people executing health behaviors in their real life. So this is a big pile of nuance. We can't just lambaste all ultra-processed foods. What if that's somebody's entire diet? Something to think about. I just want us to be really, really open to all possible sides so we can be as nuanced as possible and unbiased as possible. The third factor here is this processing skepticism. The industrial extraction process sounds pretty gross. Deodorizing, bleaching. And for people who prioritize whole food eating, it's totally understandable to want to minimize exposure to highly refined oils. Right? Anybody who's a healthy eater, I consider myself a healthy eater. I don't use canola oil. I use olive oil. I use butter. I just am using the naturally occurring oils because I do prefer the naturally occurring foods. That would be whole food. I think about this in terms of the human diet. What is the human diet? It might not be canola. For me, if I can go olive oil or avocado oil or butter, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? So it really depends on what question you're trying to answer. Is a seed oil a natural whole food? No, it's an industrial processed food. Is it toxic or inflammatory to humans? No, not according to current data. Is it a good idea to get your fats from Doritos and donuts? No. So this is where I think coaches need to zoom out and integrate both truths. So Mark Sisson, my guru, and the Ancestral movement were absolutely right to notice that something shifted in the 20th century. As our diets became dominated by industrial products, chronic disease exploded. There were a lot of other factors there too, though. It wasn't just processed foods, right? Lots of other things changed in the 20th century. Our access to technology, our sedentary lifestyle, stressors increased, sleep disruption, circadian disruption. I mean, the chemicals in the environment. It's really hard to pinpoint it on one thing. And so researchers are absolutely right to clarify that the molecule itself, linoleic acid, isn't the villain per se. So maybe the most honest answer, the most unbiased answer is seed oils are a marker, but not a cause. Okay, so if you see seed oils in an ingredient list, it's usually a red flag for an ultra-processed food. That's probably a real culprit. And I feel like we can maybe all agree on that. If your diet is made up of mostly whole single ingredient foods, meat, fish, poultry, eggs, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, olive oil, avocado oil, butter, and you occasionally eat something cooked in canola oil, your body can handle it just fine. In fact, anecdote time. I live out in the country in a gorgeous little rustic cottage in the forest, and there's only one restaurant nearby. It's a pub. And they have great chicken wings on wing night. So once in a while, go to the pub for wing night. And those are definitely cooked in canola oil. But if it's like once every 4 weeks I'm eating chicken wings fried in canola oil, I think my body's pretty dang resilient. I do. It can handle that. I don't think that's going to be any kind of health showstopper for me. Now, would I do that 5 days a week? Breakfast every day, chicken wings fried in canola oil? No, that wouldn't be a healthy choice. But I think we all know that on some level, right? The goal isn't to live in a seed oil-free bunker. It's just to minimize industrial foods as a category and eat in a way that's ancestrally aligned without becoming dogmatic. And when it comes to working with our clients, we have to factor in their human lived experience, their schedule, their family life, what they got going on. Are they hitting McDonald's once a week after soccer practice? If so, it's probably fine. What can we do on those other days of the week when they're not hitting McDonald's? Do you know what I mean? Let's not, major in the minors. So for health coaches, I think this topic is an incredible opportunity to model critical thinking and intellectual humility. And this brings me back to something I mentioned earlier, which is that I'm disappointed in the infighting in the health and wellness industry. And so there's sort of this takedown culture where one coach will dunk on another coach because they have a differing opinion, and this coach will throw some research up, but this one will throw some different research up because, frankly, you can find research to support almost any theory you have at this point. And meanwhile, the health consumer is confused AF. They don't know what to do. So if you can be a little lighthouse in the fog to help clear up the confusion, a client's going to gravitate toward you. I'm so confused because Bob says seed oils are toxic, but Sally says that Bob's an idiot. What am I supposed to do? Well, Let's explore it non-dogmatically with nuance. How about that? Why don't we give that a try? Like maybe your client will come to you and say, I'm terrified of seed oils. I hear they're really toxic for you, but like I just have to eat processed food because I am on a very tight budget. You could say, yeah, I totally get it. There's definitely a lot of conflicting information out there. Let's look at your overall food pattern and see what's driving your energy or weight concerns first. Maybe there's some other little needle we can move there. Maybe there's a bigger picture we can establish here instead of focusing on that minutia. Or if your client comes in and says, oh, this seed oil panic, this crazy pseudoscience, I would validate that too while still inviting nuance. That's fair. The research doesn't show toxicity, but there's also value in choosing minimally processed fats when possible. Can you see how those two things can be in play at the same time? Yes, seed oils might be overplayed in terms of their toxicity, but I think we can all agree that processed foods, we're probably better off without those. Wouldn't you agree? Nuance. You don't need to be the mythbuster or the zealot. I know this stuff gets big traction on social media, but that's because social media has a built-in negativity bias. And the arguments get the views. Great. What about the people trying to get help with their health? For those people, our prospective clients, you can be the curious, evolving practitioner who says, here's what we know today, and I'm open to learning more tomorrow. And that's leadership. And that's what keeps the field of coaching credible and trustworthy. When we can resist the urge to turn everything into the hill we're going to die on. So where does this leave us? Okay. Well, seed oils aren't poison, but they're also not superfoods. They're just one small piece of a much bigger dietary puzzle. A dietary puzzle that's influenced far more by how we eat and what else we eat, the totality of our eating, than by any one single ingredient. So if you take nothing else from this episode, let it be this. Please stay curious. Please be willing to evolve and never let your nutrition philosophy become your whole identity. For the sake of the health consumer, your prospective client who needs to be unconfused by the very confusing nutrition and health landscape. Thank you for listening to Health Coach Radio. I'm sure this one got your wheels turning. My hope is it got your wheels turning toward nuance. Do me a favor, don't dig your heels in on your personal bias. Explore the other side. Be curious. Challenge your assumptions in both directions. That's a good thing. That is an amazing quality in a health coach. And that's what I want to see health coaches doing more of. Okay, so keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.